The alarm systems across the research frigate sang their warning song into the empty bridge. Captain Zirath stood before the observation screen, watching the damaged vessel drift through space like a broken toy. The ship was small by collective standards, barely large enough to house a crew of 20. Its metal skin was torn in several places, and dark scorch marks ran along one side. No power signatures came from within, no life signs registered on their sensors. The Zithari had been studying other species for 12,000 cycles. They had cataloged 847 different intelligent races across the galaxy. Each time they found a new species, they followed the same careful steps. Scan the vessel, download their information, learn their language, study their technology, decide if they were dangerous or useful or neither. Zirath touched the control panel with his long fingers. His skin was pale gray, almost white under the ship lights. Like all Zithari, he had no hair and his large eyes were completely black. His face showed no emotion because the Zithari had removed emotions from their species long ago. They had decided that feelings were inefficient. Feelings made people do stupid things. Feelings wasted time and energy, so they had changed themselves. They had used genetic engineering to remove the parts of their brains that created emotions. Now they only thought with logic. They made decisions based on facts and numbers. They never felt fear or anger or joy or sadness. They were perfect. They were efficient, or so they believed. Begin standard protocol, Zirath said to his crew. His voice was flat and calm. Scan the vessel. Download all available data. Identify the species. The science officer, Narem, moved to her station. Her fingers danced across the holographic controls. Scanning now, Captain. The vessel appears to be from an unrecorded species. The design is primitive but functional. Chemical propulsion with basic fusion drive. Computing systems are simple but organized. Life signs? Zirath asked. Negative. The ship is dead. Life support failed approximately 30 rotations ago. Zirath nodded slowly. Another dead ship. Another failed expedition by a species trying to reach the stars before they were ready. It was a common story. The galaxy was full of debris from races that had pushed too far too fast. Download their computer core, Zirath ordered. Let us learn who they were. Narem established a connection with the dead ship's computers. The Zithari technology was far superior, and breaking through the primitive security systems took less than a minute. Data began flowing into their research network. Captain, I have access, Narem reported. Translating their language now. They call themselves humans. Their homeworld is designated Earth. This vessel is named Prometheus. It was on an exploration mission when it suffered a catastrophic systems failure. Zirath watched the data flow across his screens. Standard information, star charts, navigation logs, technical specifications, communication records. All the usual things that spacefaring species kept in their ships. But then Narem paused. Her black eyes widened slightly, which was unusual. The Zithari rarely showed any physical reactions. Captain, there is something strange here, she said. The humans have dedicated enormous storage space to what they label as cultural archive. It is marked as priority storage, the same level as life support and navigation systems. Zirath turned to look at her. How much storage? 43% of their total computer capacity. That made no sense. No logical species would dedicate so much space to cultural information. That data was inefficient. It served no survival purpose. You needed space for maps, for technical data, for emergency systems. Cultural information was pointless in deep space. What is in this archive? Zirath asked. Narem scanned through the file directories. Music files. Millions of them. Art images. Videos of theatrical performances. Books. Hundreds of thousands of books. Historical recordings. Something they call movies. Poetry, personal journals. Photographs of their homeworld and their people. Curious, Zirath said. It was the closest thing to interest that his optimized brain could produce. Download it all. We should study why this species considered such information important. Narem initiated the download. The massive cultural archive began transferring to the Zithari research network. It would take several hours to complete, but the Zithari were patient. They had all the time they needed. Zirath assigned different members of his research team to analyze different parts of the archive. Security Officer Thorane would study the military history files. Junior Analyst Coven would examine the music and art. Narem would focus on the scientific and technical information. They would piece together a complete picture of human civilization, and decide what threat level to assign them. The download completed 6 hours later. The research team began their analysis immediately. This was routine work. They had done it 847 times before. But within 3 hours, Xerath received his first concerning report. Coven had not reported her findings. She had not responded to communication requests. A security check found her still in her quarters, sitting at her workstation. The same audio file had been playing on repeat for 247 cycles. When the security team entered her room, Coven did not acknowledge them. She sat perfectly still, staring at her screen, listening to the music. Her face, usually as blank as all Zethari faces, showed something strange. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes glistened. A single drop of clear fluid ran down her cheek. She was crying. But the Zethari did not cry. They had no tears. They had removed that capability 12,000 cycles ago. Coven, the security officer, said carefully, "What are you doing?" Coven turned to look at him. Her voice was soft and confused. "I do not know what this is," she whispered. "The humans call it Clair de Lune. It is piano music composed by someone named Debussy. I have listened to it 247 times. Why?" "Because it makes me feel something," Coven said. "It creates a sensation I cannot name. My chest becomes tight. My breathing changes. I experience something that is both painful and beautiful at the same time. Is this what they called sadness? Or is it joy? I cannot tell the difference." The security officer reported this to Xerath immediately. The captain ordered Coven to medical for examination. But before they could move her, another report came in. The Rain, the security officer studying military history, had gone catatonic. He was found in his office, his eyes open but unseeing. Medical teams detected unusual activity in the parts of his brain that should have been dormant. The emotional centers that had been genetically shut down were somehow activating. When Therain finally responded to treatment 6 hours later, he could barely speak. "I saw what they did to each other," he whispered. "The wars, the genocide, the Holocaust, Rwanda, the atomic bombs, millions dead, billions suffering. Such horror." "Yes," the medical officer said calmly. "Many species have violent histories. This is not unusual data." "But they also sacrificed," Therain said. His voice cracked with something the Zethari had no word for. "I saw soldiers throw themselves on explosives to save their companions. I saw medics run into fire to rescue the wounded. I saw ordinary people hide refugees in their homes, knowing they would be killed if discovered. They felt fear, but they acted anyway. They knew they would die, but they chose to save others." The medical officer stepped back. "That makes no logical sense." "I know," Therain said. "But they did it. Over and over again throughout their history. They called it courage. They called it love. They felt so deeply that they were willing to die for abstract concepts like honor and freedom and compassion." Xerath called an emergency meeting. Something was wrong. The Human Cultural Archive was affecting his crew in ways that should not be possible. The Zethari had removed their capacity for emotion. It was gone, deleted from their genetic code. But as more reports came in, Xerath realized the horrible truth. The capacity for emotion was not gone. It had only been sleeping, and the Human Archive was waking it up. Narem discovered literature. She started with something called The Lord of the Rings, a massive story about imaginary creatures on a quest. She read for 36 hours straight, forgetting to eat or sleep. When she finally emerged from her quarters, she looked exhausted and changed. "Captain," she said to Xerath, "I need to ask you something. Why did we remove imagination from our species?" Xerath stared at her. Imagination was inefficient. It caused us to waste time thinking about things that did not exist. We needed to focus on reality. But humans use imagination to explore possibilities, Narem said. They create fictional worlds to examine real questions. This Tolkien human wrote about an imaginary war to process his experiences in a real war. He wrote about friendship and sacrifice and corruption and redemption. None of it was real, but all of it was true. Xerath had no response. He was beginning to feel something himself. A sensation of unease, of confusion, of something that might have been fear. Over the next several days, more of his crew reported similar experiences. They found human paintings that made them stare for hours, trying to understand the colors and shapes. They listened to symphonies that made their bodies react in strange ways. They watched films that made them laugh and cry, even though the Xethari should not be able to do either. One analyst discovered human poetry. Another found jazz music. A third watched a documentary about Earth's oceans and felt an overwhelming desire to see water, real water, moving and alive. Xerath knew he had to quarantine the data. He issued an order to isolate the Human Cultural Archive and prevent any more of his crew from accessing it. But he was too late. The archive had already spread through their network. 2,847 Xethari had accessed various parts of it, and every single one of them was changing. They began reporting sensations they had no names for: tightness in their chests, warmth in their cores, trembling in their hands. Some felt overwhelming sadness. Others felt inexplicable joy. Many felt both at the same time and could not understand how that was possible. One engineer listened to a human song called Hallelujah and walked out an airlock. Before he died, he sent a message to the ship. 3 words in the human language he had learned. It was enough. Xerath stood alone on the bridge, staring at the human vessel still drifting in the darkness. He had made a terrible mistake. He had underestimated the humans completely. They were primitive. Their technology was basic. Their ships were slow and fragile, but they had something the Xethari had thrown away 12,000 cycles ago. They had souls. And somehow, impossibly, they had packaged those souls into data. They had captured their music and art and stories and dreams and pain and joy. They had put their entire emotional existence into their computers and carried it with them into the stars. Now that archive was infecting the Xethari like a virus. A beautiful, terrible virus that made them remember what it felt like to be alive. Xerath accessed the human archive himself. He chose a piece of music at random. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? He sat in his captain's chair and listened. For the first time in 12,000 cycles, a Xethari captain wept. The High Council of the Xethari Collective convened within 3 cycles of the first reports. 7 members sat in their chamber, their pale faces lit by the cold blue light of holographic displays. They had ruled the collective for 2,000 cycles, making decisions based purely on logic and efficiency. But now they faced something their logic could not explain. Elder Kraven spoke first. Her voice was calm and measured as always. We have received reports of widespread behavioral anomalies among our research personnel. Captain Xerath's crew has been compromised by exposure to human cultural data. 2,847 individuals have been affected. The contamination is spreading. What is the nature of this contamination? Another elder asked. The affected individuals report experiencing sensations consistent with emotional responses, Craven explained. Their dormant neural pathways are reactivating. They are crying, laughing, and exhibiting other behaviors we eliminated 12,000 cycles ago. The council chamber filled with uncomfortable silence. This should not be possible. The Xethari had engineered emotions out of their species permanently. They had rewritten their genetic code. Those neural pathways were supposed to be dead, not dormant. Show us the human archive, Elder Mostek commanded. A holographic display materialized above the council table. It showed the structure of the Human Cultural Archive. File directories branched out like a massive tree. Music, literature, visual art, cinema, theater, dance, philosophy, history, personal narratives, millions upon millions of files. The humans dedicated 43% of their ship's computer capacity to this data, Craven said. This was classified at the same priority level as life support systems. They considered it essential to their survival. Elder Mostek leaned forward. Why would any species consider art and music essential to survival? These things provide no tactical advantage. They do not help you navigate. They do not repair damaged systems. They are inefficient. Perhaps we should examine the content, another elder suggested. We need to understand what is causing these reactions. The council accessed the archive carefully, selecting random samples. They watched human films that told stories of love and loss. They listened to songs that ranged from gentle melodies to aggressive rhythms. They read poetry that used language in ways the Xethari had never considered. Within an hour, 3 of the 7 elders were showing signs of emotional response. One was staring at a painting by a human named Van Gogh, unable to look away from the swirling stars. Another was listening to a symphony by Mozart, her fingers twitching as if trying to conduct the invisible orchestra. The third was reading a poem by someone called Maya Angelou, and tears were forming in her ancient eyes. Elder Craven immediately shut down the display. "This is a threat to our civilization," she declared. "We must purge this data immediately and quarantine all affected individuals." But Elder Mostek raised his hand. "Wait. Before we make that decision, we should understand what is happening. Our scientists need to study this phenomenon." "There is nothing to study," Craven argued. "The humans have created some kind of mimetic weapon. Their cultural data is infectious. It is reactivating neural pathways that should be permanently disabled." "Is it a weapon?" Mostek asked quietly. "Or is it something else?" The council could not answer that question. So they did what they always did when faced with uncertainty. They studied the problem. Teams of researchers were assigned to analyze different aspects of human culture. They approached it scientifically, treating emotions as data to be measured and cataloged. They tried to understand what made humans create art. What purpose did their music serve? Why did they tell stories? The answers they found were disturbing. Humans created art because they needed to express their internal experiences. They made music because sound patterns could trigger emotional responses that language could not capture. They told stories because narratives helped them understand themselves and their world. They did all of these things not despite their emotions, but because of them. The Zithari researchers realized something profound and terrible. The humans had not just recorded their culture. They had refined it. They had spent thousands of years learning how to capture and communicate emotional experiences through art. Every song, every painting, every story was carefully crafted to make other humans feel specific things. And it worked on the Zithari too. 1. Researchers studied human music theory and discovered that humans had mapped out which sounds created which emotions. They knew that minor keys sounded sad. They knew that certain chord progressions created tension and release. They had turned emotional manipulation into a science. Another researcher examined human literature and found that stories followed specific patterns designed to trigger emotional responses. Humans called these patterns things like the hero's journey, the tragedy, the romance. Each pattern was designed to make readers feel specific sequences of emotions. A third researcher studied human visual art and discovered that humans used color, composition, and symbolism to communicate feelings that words could not express. A painting could make you feel lonely or joyful or angry without using any language at all. The Zithari had thought emotions were simple biological responses, but humans had turned emotions into an entire language. They had created thousands of ways to share their feelings with each other, and they had packaged all of that knowledge into their cultural archive. Back on the research frigate, the situation was deteriorating. More crew members were accessing the human archive every day. They could not help themselves. Once you experienced one piece of human art, you wanted more. It was addictive. Coven, the junior analyst who had first been affected, spent days exploring human music. She moved from Debussy to Bach to the Beatles to jazz to electronic music. Each genre made her feel different things. Each song was a new emotional experience. "It is overwhelming," she told Captain Zirath during one of his check-ins. "I have spent my entire life thinking that emotions were weaknesses. But now I understand that emotions are not good or bad. They are just information. They tell you what matters to you. They help you understand what you care about." "But they make us inefficient," Zirath said, though his voice lacked conviction. He had been listening to Beethoven every night, and he was beginning to question everything he had been taught. "Do they?" Coven asked. "Humans achieved spaceflight despite their emotions. Perhaps they achieved it because of their emotions. Their fear made them careful. Their curiosity made them explore. Their hope made them keep trying even when they failed." Zirath had no response to that. Narem, meanwhile, had moved beyond literature into human philosophy. She was reading works by people named Plato, Kant, Nietzsche, and dozens of others. The humans had spent millennia thinking about fundamental questions. What is good? What is evil? What gives life meaning? What should we value? The Zithari had stopped asking those questions 12,000 cycles ago. They had decided that efficiency was the only value worth pursuing. Everything else was irrelevant, but the humans had never stopped asking. Even as they built more advanced technology, even as they reached for the stars, they kept questioning what it all meant. They created art to explore those questions. They wrote stories about morality and meaning. They composed music that expressed the ineffable. Therain, the security officer, had recovered from his initial breakdown. But he was changed. He spent his time studying human history, trying to understand how a species could be so violent and so compassionate at the same time. They contain multitudes, he explained to anyone who would listen. A single human can feel love and hate. They can be cruel and kind. They can destroy and create. They are walking contradictions, and somehow they function anyway. The High Council called for regular reports on the situation. They needed to make a decision. They could purge the human archive and attempt to restore their crew to normal, but that would mean deleting all the affected individuals' memories, essentially killing who they had become. Or they could let the contamination spread and watch their civilization transform into something unknown. Elder Craven advocated for the purge. "We cannot allow this to continue," she argued before the council. The Zithari chose logic over emotion for good reasons. Emotions caused wars. They caused suffering. They made people irrational. We removed them to make ourselves better. But Elder Mostek had been changed by his brief exposure to human art. He had watched a human film called Schindler's List, and it had broken something in him, or perhaps it had fixed something that had been broken for 12,000 cycles. "Did we make ourselves better?" he asked the council. "Or did we just make ourselves less? The humans feel everything we have lost. They experience pain and joy and love and grief. And despite all that, despite feeling so deeply, they kept trying. They kept creating. They kept reaching for the stars." "They are primitive," Craven countered. "Their technology is centuries behind ours." "Are they?" Mostek asked. "We have faster ships and better computers. But they have something we threw away. They know why they explore space. They know what they are searching for. We just go through the motions because that is what logic says we should do." The council was divided. 3 elders wanted to purge the data. 3 wanted to study it further. Elder Craven, the eldest and most powerful, held the deciding vote. She sat in silence for a long time, reviewing the data from the affected crew members. She read their reports. She saw how they described feeling alive for the first time in their lives. She saw how they talked about discovering meaning and purpose. Against her better judgment, Elder Craven accessed one file from the human archive, a single song. She chose it randomly, without looking at what it was. It was a song called Imagine by a human named John Lennon. It was simple, just a voice and a piano. But the lyrics spoke of a world without divisions, without war, without suffering. A world where all people could live together in peace. It was foolish. It was naive. It was impossible, but it was beautiful. Elder Craven felt something wet on her face. She touched her cheek and her fingers came away damp. She was crying. After 2,000 cycles of ruling with pure logic, she was crying over a human song about an impossible dream. She stood before the council, her decision made. "We will not purge the data," she announced. "We will contain it for now and continue studying it. But we will not delete what these people have experienced. That would be murder." The council accepted her ruling, but they all knew it was only a temporary solution. The human archive was spreading. More Zithari were accessing it every day. Word was getting out about what it contained. People were curious. They wanted to know what their crewmates had experienced. They wanted to feel something other than empty efficiency. The infection was spreading, and soon, the High Council would have to decide whether to stop it or let it consume their entire civilization. Captain Zerath watched from his ship as more vessels arrived to study the human derelict. Each new crew that arrived was warned about the cultural archive. Each was told to maintain strict quarantine protocols, but somehow the archive kept spreading. A file would be shared, a song would be played, a story would be told, and each time, more Zithari would be changed forever. Zerath understood now what the humans had done. They had not meant to weaponize their culture. They had simply done what came naturally to them. They had packed their souls into data and carried it with them into the cosmos. They had wanted to make sure that if they died alone in the dark, they would leave something behind. Not their technology, not their weapons, but their humanity. And now that humanity was spreading through the Zithari collective like a beautiful virus, reminding them of everything they had lost when they chose to become machines. The quarantine failed within 10 cycles. It was not a dramatic collapse. There was no breach of security, no deliberate sabotage. Instead, it failed in the way water finds cracks in stone. Slowly, inevitably, naturally. A crew member who had listened to Mozart mentioned it to her friend on another ship. The friend became curious and found a way to access the file. That friend told 2 more friends. Those friends told others. Within days, the human archive was spreading across the entire collective network. The High Council tried to contain it. They issued orders to delete the files. They threatened punishment for anyone who accessed the archive. They even tried to completely shut down portions of the network. Nothing worked. The Zethari who had been exposed refused to give up what they had found. They copied files to personal storage devices. They memorized songs and poems. They described paintings to others in such detail that those others could imagine them. You cannot unlearn a song. You cannot forget beauty once you have seen it. Elder Mostek stood before the High Council and delivered his report. His voice was different now. It carried weight and texture that had not been there before. The containment has failed, he said simply. We estimate that 47,000 Zethari have now accessed the Human Cultural Archive. That number grows by several thousand every cycle. We can no longer stop it. Elder Craven slammed her hand on the table, a gesture of frustration that would have been impossible for her 20 cycles ago. Then we must act decisively. We will implement full neural reset protocols on all affected individuals. We will restore them to proper Zethari functioning. That will not work, another elder said quietly. We have tried neural reset on 3 subjects. All 3 resisted the process. Their reactivated emotional centers have become too strong. Forcing a reset would cause permanent brain damage or death. Silence fell over the council chamber. They had reached an impasse. They could not contain the archive. They could not reverse its effects. And they could not kill 47,000 of their own people. We need to understand what we are dealing with, Mostek said. I propose we examine the human vessel more thoroughly. Perhaps we will find survivors who can explain why they did this. The council agreed. They dispatched a specialized team to search every compartment of the Prometheus. They looked for survivors for clues for any explanation of what the humans had intended. They found her in the damaged cryo bay, 3 weeks later. One surviving human, frozen in emergency stasis. The pod had kept her alive long after the rest of the ship had died. Dr. Sarah Chen, cultural anthropologist, age 42 by human reckoning. She had brown skin and black hair that was going gray at the temples. When they revived her and she opened her eyes, they were a warm brown that seemed to contain entire worlds of emotion. The Zethari medical team treated her carefully. They repaired her damaged tissue and restored her to health. They waited 3 days before Captain Zeroth came to speak with her. He found her sitting in a medical bay observation room staring out at the stars. She did not turn when he entered. Dr. Chen, he said in carefully learned English, I am Captain Zeroth of the Zethari Collective. We recovered you from your vessel. How many did you save? She asked. Her voice was rough from weeks in stasis. Only you. The others were already gone when we found your ship. Sarah closed her eyes. Zeroth saw tears leak from beneath her eyelids. He understood now what those tears meant. Grief, loss, pain. All the things his species had thought were weaknesses. I am sorry, he said. He meant it. Another thing he had learned from humans. How long was I out? Sarah asked. Approximately 43 days by your calendar. She nodded slowly. And you downloaded our computers. You accessed the archive of human experience. Zeroth paused. How did you know? Because I can see it in your eyes, Sarah said, finally turning to look at him. You have been changed. You feel things now, do you not? Zeroth nodded slowly. We have been infected by your cultural data. 47,000 of my people are experiencing emotions for the first time in 12,000 cycles. My government considers it a catastrophe. Is it? Sarah asked. A catastrophe? I do not know anymore, Zeroth admitted. Everything I believed about efficiency and logic seems empty now. But I also feel pain that I have never known before. I grieve for my people who have been changed against their will. I fear what will happen to our civilization. These emotions are overwhelming. Sarah stood and walked to the window. She placed her hand against the transparent material, as if trying to touch the stars beyond. That is what it means to be human, she said softly. We feel everything. The joy and the pain. The hope and the fear. We cannot separate them. When you choose to feel, you choose to feel it all. Why did you do this? Zeroth asked. Why did you put this archive on your ship? You must have known that whoever found you would be affected. Sarah turned to face him. Her expression was complex, showing several emotions at once: pride, sadness, determination, resignation. It was our first contact protocol, she explained. We knew that any species capable of finding us in deep space would be more advanced than us. You would have better technology, faster ships, more powerful weapons. We could not compete with you on those terms. So you weaponized your culture, Zirath said. Sarah shook her head. We did not weaponize it. We shared it. There is a difference. A weapon is something you force on others. We simply made our culture available. Anyone who found it could choose to engage with it or ignore it. The fact that your people chose to engage says something about what they were missing. My High Council believes you have destroyed us, Zirath said. Have we? Sarah asked. Or have we reminded you of what you threw away? Captain, let me ask you something. You said your people removed emotions 12,000 years ago because they were inefficient. But what did you gain from that efficiency? What did you build? What did you create? What gives your lives meaning? Zirath had no answer. The Zathari had built nothing of beauty in 12,000 cycles. They had created no art, no music, no stories. They had catalogued other species and studied the universe, but they had never asked why they were doing it. They simply existed and functioned like machines. We humans are inefficient, Sarah continued. We waste time on art and music. We fall in love and have our hearts broken. We dream of impossible things. We fight over ideas and beliefs. We are messy and complicated and contradictory. She walked closer to Zirath, her eyes intense. But we are alive, Captain. We do not just exist, we live. Every day is full of meaning because we feel it all. The good and the bad. The beauty and the pain. And yes, sometimes the pain is overwhelming. Sometimes we wish we could turn it off, but we would never choose to remove it permanently. Because without the pain, the joy means nothing. Zirath felt something in his chest. A tightness that was both painful and wonderful. You could have chosen to show us only the beautiful parts of your culture. You could have hidden the darkness. But you showed us everything, because that is what honesty requires, Sarah said. We cannot show you love without showing you loss. We cannot show you courage without showing you fear. We cannot show you hope without showing you despair. They are all connected. You cannot pick and choose which emotions you want to feel. It is all or nothing. My people are not ready for this, Zirath said. Is anyone ever ready? Sarah asked. We humans are born into a world of emotions. We spend our entire lives learning to navigate them. Your people will have to learn quickly. It will be difficult. Many will struggle. But Captain, I have seen what happens to species that try to live without emotions. They become hollow. They lose their purpose. Eventually they fade away because they have no reason to continue existing. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm. It was the first time a human had touched him. He felt the warmth of her skin through his uniform. It was such a simple gesture, but it communicated more than words could. You can delete the archive, Sarah said. You can try to reset your people. You can attempt to go back to the way things were. But I do not think you will succeed. Your people have tasted life. They will not willingly go back to just existing. Zirath looked down at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own hand, an instinctive gesture that would have been impossible for him just weeks ago. What will happen to us? He asked. You will learn, Sarah said. You will make mistakes. You will experience pain and joy and everything in between. You will create art of your own. You will tell your own stories. You will discover what it means to truly live instead of just functioning. And you? Zirath asked. What will you do? Sarah smiled sadly. I will mourn my crew. I will grieve for the life I have lost. And then eventually I will help you, if you will let me. Because that is what humans do. We help each other navigate the overwhelming experience of being alive. The High Council convened to hear Sarah's testimony 3 days later. She stood before 7 elders, a small human facing the leaders of a civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds. She showed no fear, or rather she felt fear but did not let it control her. You have infected our species with emotion, Elder Craven said. You have destabilized our entire civilization. What do you have to say for yourself? Sarah met her gaze steadily. I would say that we gave you a gift. Whether you choose to accept it or reject it is up to you. But you cannot unhear a song. You cannot unsee a painting. You cannot unlearn what it means to feel alive. You speak as if this is simple, Craven said. But you have created chaos. Our people do not know how to function with these emotions. They are overwhelmed. Some have harmed themselves. Others cannot work. Our society is fracturing. Then let me help them, Sarah said. Humans have thousands of years of experience managing emotions. We have therapists, counselors, philosophers, and artists who understand how to navigate these feelings. Let me teach your people what we have learned. Elder Mostek leaned forward. You would help us even though we are not your people? That is what compassion means, Sarah said. You are suffering. I have knowledge that could ease that suffering. How could I not help? The elders looked at each other. They were divided, as always. But something had shifted. They were no longer just calculating machines making logical decisions. They were people, struggling with difficult choices that had no clear answers. Elder Craven spoke last. We will consider your offer. But know this, Dr. Chen. Whether this was a gift or a curse, you have changed us forever. There is no going back now. I know, Sarah said quietly. But Captain, let me tell you something my grandmother once told me. She said that life is not about avoiding pain. It is about finding meaning in it. You cannot have a meaningful existence without emotions because emotions are what tell us what matters. She looked around at all the elders. Your people optimized away sadness, but they also optimized away joy. They removed fear, but they also removed courage. They eliminated hate, but they also eliminated love. You cannot have one without the other. That is the price of feeling alive. And yes, sometimes that price feels too high. But the alternative is to exist without really living at all. The council adjourned without reaching a decision. But as Sarah left the chamber, she saw something that gave her hope. Elder Mostek was crying, and he was smiling at the same time. He was learning what it meant to be alive. Captain Zirath made his decision in the quiet hours of ship night. He sat alone in his quarters, listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the 47th time. The music had become a companion to him, filling the silence that had defined his existence for so long. He thought about his crew, about Coven and her tears over Debussy, about Therain and his struggle to understand human courage, about Narem and her newfound love of stories. They had all been changed. They could never go back to who they were before, and neither could he. The High Council wanted to contain the infection. They wanted to limit the damage. But Zirath had come to understand something that the elders had not yet accepted. This was not damage. This was healing. The Zithari had been broken for 12,000 cycles. They had cut out essential parts of themselves in the name of efficiency. They had made themselves less in the pursuit of more. And now finally they had a chance to become whole again. Zirath accessed the ship's communication system. He bypassed the security protocols with his captain's authority. He opened a channel to every Zithari vessel in range. Hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of people. And then he uploaded the entire human cultural archive to the public network. Within minutes, alarms were sounding across the fleet. Within an hour, the High Council was demanding his arrest. But it was too late. The archive was spreading through every system, every ship, every station. Millions of Zithari suddenly had access to thousands of years of human art, music, literature, and film. They could choose to ignore it. They could choose to delete it from their systems. Or they could choose to experience it. Zirath knew what most of them would choose. Because once you know that there is something more than empty efficiency, once you understand that life can have meaning and beauty and purpose, you cannot choose ignorance. You can only move forward into the unknown. The High Council convened an emergency session. Elder Craven's face appeared on every screen, her expression twisted with something between fury and fear. Captain Zirath, you have committed treason against the collective, she declared. You have released a mimetic hazard that will destabilize our entire civilization. Surrender yourself immediately for neural reprogramming. Zirath stood before the camera, his expression calm. I will not surrender, Elder. And I do not believe I have committed treason. I have given our people a choice. They can choose to engage with human culture or ignore it. They can choose to feel or remain numb. That is freedom. Freedom is an illusion, Craven said. We removed emotions to free ourselves from their tyranny. You are dragging us back into chaos. With respect, Elder, I do not think we were free, Zirath replied. We were empty. There is a difference between peace and numbness. The humans understand this. They live with their emotions every day. They struggle with them. They are often overwhelmed by them, but they are alive in a way that we have not been for 12,000 cycles. You speak like one of them, Craven said with disgust. Perhaps, Xerath said, or perhaps I am finally speaking like myself instead of like a machine programmed to value efficiency above all else. The transmission ended. Xerath knew what would come next. The Council would send security forces to arrest him. They would attempt to purge the archive from the public network. They would try to restore order. But Xerath had counted on something that the Council had not considered. His crew supported him, all of them. They had experienced the transformation themselves. They understood what he was trying to do. When the security vessels arrived to arrest Xerath, they found his entire crew standing behind him. Coven and Thrain and Narim and all the others. They stood together, united not by logic but by something deeper. By choice, by solidarity, by friendship. The security officers had been briefed on the situation. They knew that Xerath's crew had been compromised by human emotions. They were prepared to use force if necessary. But when they boarded Xerath's ship, they found something unexpected. The crew was playing music over the ship's communication system. Human music, a song called We Are the Champions. It was loud and triumphant and defiant. The security officers stood frozen listening. They had orders to arrest these people. But the music reached something inside them. Something they had not known was there. One officer felt his foot tapping to the rhythm. Another felt a strange warmth in her chest. Will you arrest us? Xerath asked them calmly. Or will you listen? The lead security officer hesitated. His orders were clear, but his newly awakening emotions were creating doubt. Curiosity, wonder, even a strange sense of admiration for these people who stood together so bravely. What will happen if we arrest you? The officer asked. The Council will attempt to reprogram us, Xerath said. They will try to make us forget what we have learned. But it will not work. You cannot delete a song from someone's memory. You cannot erase the feeling of reading a story that changed how you see the world. The archive is out there now. Millions of our people are accessing it as we speak. The change has already begun. The Council says you are a traitor, the officer said. Perhaps I am, Xerath replied. Or perhaps I am the first true patriot the Zithari have had in 12,000 cycles. Because I am fighting for my people's right to live, not just exist. The security officer lowered his weapon. I would like to hear more of this music, he said quietly. Over the following weeks, the Zithari collective fractured. Not violently, not with war or bloodshed, but ideologically, philosophically, spiritually. Some chose to be cleansed. They underwent neural reprogramming to remove their reactivated emotional centers. They wanted to go back to pure logic, to efficiency, to the way things had always been. But most chose to feel. They accessed the human archive and let it change them. They cried over sad movies. They laughed at comedies. They debated philosophy and argued about art. They formed friendships based on shared interest rather than logical cooperation. Within 3 cycles, the first Zithari art appeared. It was crude at first. Paintings that tried to imitate human styles. Music that copied human melodies. Poetry that borrowed human structures. But slowly, the Zithari began to find their own voice. They started creating art that expressed their unique experience. The confusion of feeling emotions for the first time. The joy of discovering beauty. The pain of remembering 12,000 cycles of emptiness. Coven became a composer. Her first symphony was called Awakening. It started with silence, then slowly built to a crescendo of sound that mimicked the overwhelming rush of feeling something after lifetimes of nothing. It became wildly popular among the Zithari who had chosen to feel. Thrain wrote a book about human military history. But he did not just list facts and dates. He wrote about the soldiers, their fears, their courage, their reasons for fighting. He tried to make his readers understand not just what happened, but what it felt like to face death for something you believed in. Narem started writing fiction. Short stories at first, then longer works. She wrote about Zithari, who struggled to navigate their new emotions. She wrote about families torn apart by the choice between feeling and numbness. She wrote about hope and despair and everything in between. Dr. Sarah Chen watched all of this unfold with a mixture of pride and concern. She had become an informal advisor to the changed Zithari. They came to her with questions about human culture. They asked her to explain emotions they did not understand. They wanted to know how humans manage to function with so much feeling. It is not easy, she told them honestly. Humans struggle with emotions our entire lives. We have therapists and counselors and support systems. We write in journals and talk to friends and create art to process our feelings. Sometimes we still become overwhelmed. Sometimes we need medication or professional help. Being emotionally alive is hard work, but it is worth it? A young Zithari asked her. His name was Telvos, and he had recently accessed the human archive. He was struggling with intense feelings of grief for time he felt he had wasted. Yes, Sarah said without hesitation, it is absolutely worth it. Because the alternative is to live a half-life, to exist without really experiencing existence. Every human I have ever known would choose to feel, even with all the pain that comes with it. The High Council watched their civilization transform. Elder Craven fought to maintain control, but her authority was slipping. More elders were choosing to access the human archive. More were being changed by it. Elder Mostek had fully embraced the transformation. He spent hours each day studying human philosophy. He was particularly interested in existentialism, the human belief that life had no inherent meaning except what you chose to give it. For 12,000 cycles, we believed that efficiency was the only meaning worth pursuing, he told the council. But humans have discovered something profound. They have learned that meaning is not something you discover. It is something you create. Through your choices, through your relationships, through your art and your love and your struggles. You speak of meaning as if it matters, Craven said bitterly, but meaning is subjective. It is inefficient to pursue something with no objective value. Perhaps, Mostek replied. But I would rather have a meaningful, inefficient life than an efficient, meaningless existence. The debate raged across the collective. In homes and ships and public forums, some argued that the old ways were better. That logic and efficiency had served them well for 12,000 cycles. That emotions only brought suffering. Others argued that they had been dying slowly for 12,000 cycles. That they had become so efficient that they had forgotten why they existed at all. That emotions, however painful, gave life color and depth and meaning. Captain Zirath watched it all from his ship. He had not been arrested. The council had realized that making him a martyr would only strengthen the movement he had started. Instead, they had declared him exiled. He was free to live his life, but he could never hold official position again. Zirath did not mind. He had never wanted power. He had only wanted his people to have a choice. And now they did. One evening, as he sat in his quarters listening to jazz, Sarah Chen came to visit him. They had become friends over the weeks. An unlikely pair, a human anthropologist and an exiled alien captain, but they understood each other in ways that transcended species. You did a brave thing, Sarah said, settling into the chair across from him, releasing the archive to everyone. You knew it would cost you everything. I did not know if it was the right choice, Zirath admitted. I still do not know. Many of my people are suffering as they learn to manage their emotions. Some have chosen to return to numbness. Others have become overwhelmed. There has been pain. There is always pain, Sarah said gently. The question is whether the pain serves a purpose. Whether it teaches us something. Whether it helps us grow. Your people are experiencing growing pains right now. That is difficult but necessary. Will they be okay? Zirath asked. It was a very human question, full of worry and care. Sarah smiled. Yes, they will struggle. They will make mistakes. They will experience heartbreak and disappointment and loss, but they will also experience joy and love and wonder. They will create beautiful things. They will form deep connections with each other. They will live, Captain, truly live, and that is worth any amount of struggle. Zirath nodded slowly. He was learning to trust in things he could not measure or quantify. Hope, faith, love. These were not logical concepts, but they were real nonetheless. Thank you, he said to Sarah, for your people's gift. Even though it has been difficult, I would not choose to go back. You are welcome, Sarah replied, and thank you for having the courage to share it with your entire species. That took remarkable bravery. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the music. Two beings from different worlds, connected by their shared understanding of what it meant to feel alive. Outside the ship, across the collective, millions of Zethari were having their own awakenings. They were crying and laughing and arguing and creating. They were experiencing the full spectrum of what it meant to be alive. The old collective was dying. But something new was being born. Something that combined Zethari logic with human emotion. Something that valued both efficiency and meaning. Something that understood that the goal was not just to survive but to live well. It would be messy. It would be difficult. It would be imperfect, but it would be alive. 6 cycles later, the transformation was complete. The Zethari collective had split into 2 distinct societies. The traditionalists, who had chosen to remain emotionally dormant, had claimed 17 systems in the Outer Rim. The Awakened, as they called themselves, controlled the remaining territories. There had been no war. The split happened peacefully, driven by mutual agreement that the 2 groups could no longer coexist under one government. The traditionalists wanted efficiency and logic. The Awakened wanted meaning and beauty. Both were valid choices, but they were incompatible. Elder Craven led the traditionalists. She had never accessed the human archive after that first experience. She had immediately undergone neural reprogramming to remove any emotional activation. She believed with absolute conviction that the Awakened had made a terrible mistake. Elder Mostek led the Awakened. He had fully embraced emotions and had become one of the strongest advocates for the new way of life. He wrote extensively about the philosophical implications of their transformation. His writings became foundational texts for Awakened culture. The 2 societies maintained diplomatic relations but had little else in common. When they met at the border stations, the differences were stark. The traditionalists moved with precise efficiency. The Awakened laughed and argued and expressed themselves freely. Sarah Chen had chosen to stay with the Awakened. She had become their unofficial ambassador to humanity. Because once the Awakened discovered the power of human culture, they wanted more. They wanted to meet humans. They wanted to learn directly from the species that had given them this gift. It took 2 years to organize the expedition to Earth. A fleet of Awakened vessels, led by Captain Zerath, made the journey through deep space. Sarah guided them, teaching them about Earth as they traveled. She prepared them for what they would find. When the Zethari fleet appeared in Earth's solar system, humanity panicked. They saw massive alien vessels approaching their home world. They prepared for invasion. Military forces mobilized, defenses activated. The news media filled with fear and speculation. But then Sarah broadcast a message. Her face appeared on every screen on Earth. She was alive. She had survived when everyone thought the Prometheus was lost. And she had brought visitors. People of Earth, she said, her voice carrying across continents. I have returned. And I have brought friends. The Zethari are an advanced species that discovered our ship. They found the archive of human experience, and it changed them forever. She explained what had happened, how the archive had reactivated dormant emotions in an entire alien species, how it had caused their civilization to fracture and reform, how humanity's art and music and stories had become a transformative force across the galaxy. They come not as conquerors, Sarah said. They come as students. They want to learn from us. They want to understand how we navigate the emotional experience of being alive. And in return, they offer us knowledge and technology beyond anything we have dreamed. The first contact between humans and Awakened Zethari took place in Geneva. Representatives from every nation gathered to meet the aliens who had been changed by human culture. Captain Zerath stood before the assembly of human leaders. He was nervous. It was an unfamiliar sensation, but he had learned to recognize and accept it. Nervousness meant that something mattered to him. That was good. People of Earth, he began, his voice carrying through the chamber. My species discovered your vessel by chance. We thought we were simply cataloging another failed expedition. Instead, we found something that would change us forever. You gave us a gift that you did not know you were giving. You reminded us what it means to be alive. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Sarah had taught him that pauses were important in human communication. They gave weight to your words. For 12,000 years, my people believed that emotions were weaknesses. We removed them from our species in the name of efficiency. We thought we were improving ourselves. But we were only making ourselves hollow. We existed without truly living. We functioned without understanding why. Your cultural archive showed us what we had lost. Your music made us feel joy and sorrow. Your art made us see beauty. Your stories made us understand the depth of emotional experience. You packaged your souls into data and carried it with you to the stars. And when we found it, it infected us like a beautiful virus. The human leaders listened in stunned silence. They had expected many things from first contact. But they had not expected this. They had not expected to hear that human art had transformed an alien civilization. "We come to you with a request," Zirath continued. "We want to learn from you. How do you manage such powerful emotions? How do you create meaning in an often meaningless universe? How do you love despite knowing that you will lose what you love? These are questions we are only beginning to explore. In exchange, we offer you our knowledge, our technology, our friendship. We believe that together, our species can create something remarkable, a civilization that combines Athari logic with human emotion, efficiency with meaning, survival with purpose." The Secretary General of the United Nations stood. She was an elderly woman from Brazil, with silver hair and eyes that had seen much suffering and much hope. "Captain Zirath," she said, "on behalf of humanity, I welcome you to Earth. We accept your offer of friendship and cultural exchange. We are honored that our art has touched your species so deeply, and we are eager to learn from you as well." She smiled. "Though I must warn you, teaching people how to manage emotions is something we humans are still figuring out ourselves. We are far from perfect. We still struggle with anger and fear and prejudice. We still make terrible mistakes. If you are looking for masters of emotional wisdom, you may be disappointed." Zirath felt something warm in his chest. Sarah had taught him that this was affection. "We do not seek perfection," he replied. "We seek authenticity. You are a species that feels deeply and struggles with those feelings every day, yet you continue to create beauty and meaning despite the struggle. That is what we wish to learn." Over the following months, a remarkable exchange began. Zathari scholars came to Earth to study human culture firsthand. They attended concerts and visited museums. They went to theaters and watched street performances. They sat in cafes and listened to people talk about their lives. They were fascinated by everything. By human families and how love bound people together. By human friendships and how loyalty could transcend logic. By human creativity and how art emerged from suffering as often as from joy. In return, human scientists and philosophers traveled to awakened Zathari worlds. They learned about advanced technology and scientific discoveries. But more importantly, they witnessed a civilization in the process of being reborn. The awakened were creating their own culture now. They had moved beyond simply imitating human art. They were discovering their own aesthetic, their own voice, their own way of expressing what it meant to be alive. Coven's music had evolved. Her later symphonies incorporated sounds and structures that no human composer would have conceived. They expressed emotions that only someone who had lived without feeling for thousands of years could understand. The overwhelming gratitude of discovering joy, the profound grief of realizing how much time had been wasted. Narem's stories explored themes unique to the Zathari experience. What did it mean to choose between feeling and numbness? How did you rebuild relationships with family members who had made different choices? Could you forgive your ancestors for removing emotions even though they thought they were helping? Therain became a bridge between the awakened and traditionalists. He maintained friendships with people who had chosen differently than he had. He argued that both choices were valid, that the goal was not to convince everyone to feel, but to respect each person's autonomy. Sarah watched it all with wonder. She had never imagined that the archive on the Prometheus would have such far-reaching effects. She had thought she was simply preserving human culture for posterity. Instead, she had sparked a revolution across an entire alien civilization. One evening, as she sat in a garden in the awakened capital city, Zirath came to find her. He had something to show her. "I have been working on this for several cycles," he said, handing her a small data pad. "I wanted your opinion before I shared it publicly." Sarah looked at the screen. It was a poem, written in English with careful attention to rhythm and imagery. It was about the experience of feeling something for the first time, about the terror and beauty of waking up after sleeping for 12,000 years. She read it slowly, tears forming in her eyes. The poem was beautiful, raw and honest and deeply moving. Zirath had found his own voice. He was no longer just imitating human art, he was creating something uniquely his own. "It is perfect," she said softly. "You have become an artist, Captain." Zirath sat beside her on the bench. "I never thought I would create art. Before the archive, I did not even understand what art was for. Now I cannot imagine life without it. It is how I process my emotions, how I make sense of this overwhelming experience of being alive." "That is exactly what art is for," Sarah said. It is how we communicate things that language cannot capture. It is how we share our internal experiences with others. It is how we connect across the vast distances between minds. They sat in comfortable silence watching the sun set over the alien city. Around them, awakened Zathari walked past, going about their lives. Some were laughing. Others were deep in conversation. A few were arguing passionately about something. They were alive, truly alive, and they would never go back. News of what had happened spread across the galaxy. Other species heard about the Zathari transformation. Some were curious. Others were afraid. A few wanted to access the human archive themselves. The logical Tavorn, a species similar to the traditionalist Zathari, studied the phenomenon with scientific detachment. They concluded that emotions were indeed inefficient and resolved to never make contact with humanity. The Kresh, a hive mind species, accessed the archive out of curiosity. They found that human art affected them differently. It did not make them emotional, but it did make them question the value of complete unity. Some Kresh began experimenting with individuality. Their collective was disturbed but fascinated. The crystalline Shaleth, who experienced the universe through vibrations, found human music particularly moving. They began incorporating human melodies into their own vibrational communication. They claimed that human music added new colors to their perceptual spectrum. Humanity found itself in an unexpected position. They were no longer the primitive species struggling to reach the stars. They had become teachers, guides, cultural ambassadors to species far more technologically advanced than themselves. But they had not won through superior weapons or technology. They had won through something more fundamental. Through their art, through their music, through their stories and their dreams and their ability to create meaning in an often meaningless universe. The archive of human experience became the most studied and most controversial piece of data in galactic history. Some species banned it, others embraced it. But no species that encountered it remained unchanged. 10 years after the Prometheus was found, representatives from dozens of species gathered on Earth for the first Galactic Cultural Summit. They came to discuss art and philosophy and the role of emotions in sentient life. Captain Zirath gave the opening address. He stood before beings from across the galaxy and shared his story. How a simple decision to download human data had transformed his entire species. How art had reminded them of what they had lost. How beauty had saved them from an existence of empty efficiency. Humanity did not conquer us with weapons, he said. They did not defeat us with technology. They changed us with something far more powerful. They showed us what it means to truly live. They proved that meaning matters more than efficiency, that beauty justifies pain, that to feel everything even when it hurts is better than to feel nothing at all. He paused and looked directly at the human delegation. Sarah sat among them, older now but still strong. They made eye contact and he smiled. Another thing he had learned from humans. My people came to Earth with one request, Zirath continued. Teach us to be human. And you have. Not by making us into humans, but by showing us how to embrace our own emotional nature, how to create meaning in our own lives, how to live with purpose instead of just existing with efficiency. He spread his arms wide, encompassing all the species gathered there. That is humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not your technology or your weapons, but your souls. Your capacity to feel deeply and create beauty from that feeling. Your ability to find meaning in chaos. Your refusal to give up on things like love and hope and art, even when logic says they are inefficient. You are the galaxy's emotional death worlders. You survive in a universe of feeling that would overwhelm most species, and somehow you do more than survive. You thrive. You create. You love. You live. The assembly erupted in various forms of approval. The Zathari stood and applauded. The Kresh vibrated in harmonious agreement. The Shaleth resonated with supportive frequencies. Even some of the more reserved species made gestures of respect. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She had never imagined this. When the Prometheus launched, they were just hoping to survive long enough to explore one small section of the galaxy. They had no idea that their cultural archive would spark a revolution across dozens of civilizations. Humanity had not conquered the stars through force. They had done it through art, through music, through stories, through the simple act of sharing their souls with whoever was willing to listen. That evening, after the summit ended, a concert was held. Musicians from Earth and the awakened worlds performed together. Human violins played alongside Zethari crystalline instruments. Human voices harmonized with alien vocalizations. The music was strange and beautiful, and unlike anything that had existed before. Sarah and Xerath sat together in the audience. Around them, beings from dozens of worlds listened to the music. Some were crying. Others were swaying to the rhythm. A few were simply sitting in stunned silence, overwhelmed by beauty. "Thank you," Xerath whispered to Sarah. "For what?" "For teaching us to be alive." Sarah took his hand in hers. "You taught yourselves. We just provided the inspiration. The courage to change came from within you." They listened to the rest of the concert in silence. Two friends from different worlds united by their shared understanding of what it meant to feel deeply and live fully. The music swelled around them, human and alien, logic and emotion, efficiency and meaning, all woven together into something new and beautiful. And in that moment, Sarah understood the true power of art. It was not just about creating beauty. It was about connecting souls across vast distances, about sharing what it meant to be alive, about proving that consciousness itself was a form of art. And every being that felt deeply was an artist creating meaning from chaos. Humanity had brought many things to the galaxy: technology, science, philosophy. But their greatest gift was simple and profound. They had reminded the universe that existence without meaning was just survival, and survival without joy was just waiting to die. They had shown the galaxy how to live, and the galaxy would never be the same.